Hey adventurers, so today's going to be another book review. This is going to be for Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is a dystopian, this is science fiction, this is kind of YA, definitely quite a bit YA. And yeah, let's go into this. Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins is another Hunger Games novel, this time telling the tale of the 50th Hunger Games and of Hamish Abernathy. So this is the 5th book that she has released in the Hunger Games series. It is the 2nd book chronologically, the first one being Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, then this one, then the original Hunger Games trilogy after that. So yeah, let's go through here. It is another prequel to the original Hunger Games trilogy and follows a character that is well known and we already know his story. However, this gives us the events and the details of the story itself instead of just allusions to it as was in the original trilogy. Before I get into this review though, I'd just quickly like to say welcome to an Erudite Adventure. I'm T. If you're liking what you're seeing from us, please like, comment, and subscribe. As with each of these Hunger Games books, Collins has a very intentional way of telling the story. Although they are more for a YA audience and are very dystopian with a heavy romance element, she does not allow that to take over the story and the horrors of this world that she has created. At this point, we as readers have seen several different Hunger Games events, and the world has seen 49. The in-world, this is the 50th Hunger Games, so there's previously been 49 other ones that the world has seen. So this, in many ways, is familiar to us. But Collins does an excellent job at taking what is familiar and twisting it into something terrible. That is what the original books did, but then with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and now Sunrise on the Reaping, the trilogy is what is familiar to us. That original trilogy is what is familiar to us, and so Collins twists that too. In those ones, it seems like the worst thing that could possibly happen, when that's just par for the course by the 75th, by the 70, I guess 3rd, 74th, and 75th Hunger Games. Is that how it works? No, it's the 74th, and then the 75th, and then the 76th. Not important. Let's get back to this review. Basically, I'm saying that Collins has, those are what we know, those are what are familiar to us. Collins takes that and twists it. That's what I'm saying. Unfortunately, we do know how this story ends, and that takes a little bit of the impact away from it. We know how Hamish's games end, and we know how Hamish's story ends, and so it's a little bit harder for us to get invested in that way because we already know what's going to happen, and that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that's a good thing, but in this instance it does take a little bit of the impact away from it. However, we don't know the story, and so Collins is still able to tell a surprising, horrifying story by giving us the context and then the first-hand account of the events of that 50th Hunger Games. And so that's very beneficial. That really helps in a lot of ways. You get to see pieces that were kind of alluded to in the original series, but also that were, mostly they were in-world. The Capitol had hidden and twisted the events into a way that was more fitting to what they were trying to say with them. And so we don't even know the true events. This is the true events that are told at that point. And that's kind of an interesting way to do it. I think that actually gives us a reason to read this story. That gives a reason for this story to exist in a way that a lot of the other ones, like if you told the story of the first Hunger Games, that would probably be worth telling. We already had the 12th. If you told the 13th through the 49th, there probably wouldn't be a ton that we would need to see from those stories, because there probably isn't going to be a ton that would be terribly different. Would I be opposed to them? No, as long as Collins has a story to tell with them, then I'm not opposed to them. But if it's just telling them to write another Hunger Games book, probably not worth it. Anyways, this one I do feel like there was a story that could be told. That is why these stories work like they do. First and foremost, they are stories. But with that, Collins is able to tell us about people and to show us how and why people are the way that they are in these books especially, but also in real life. There's a reality to these series, as there is with most dystopian books. It's some futuristic dystopian sci-fi world, but there is still a realism to it in the people and the characters and the way that they act and the way that they think and the way that they respond to things and the way that the government controls things. There's a lot of realism to the books. Of course, it is in this wild, scary setting, but that is used as a vehicle to tell the story, which is why I tend to love the dystopian genre as much as I do. Generally, there is a story being told rather than just a message trying to be pushed across. And they are using this dystopian world as a vehicle to tell that story. There are probably definitely some dystopian worlds where the agenda is more important than the story. I'm sure there are. In fact, I could probably name a couple, even if I haven't read them all. I don't really think I have a ton more to say about this book. It's a solid addition to the series and feels like a natural addition. I mentioned this when I reviewed A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but although the series does not need more books, that original trilogy is a perfectly fine standalone series. We don't need more, we don't need less, we don't need any of it really, but we don't need more of it for sure. But although that series does not need more books, and even though it is extremely obvious that by writing another Hunger Games novel, it would sell very well, especially one about Haymitch, which is the most sought after Hunger Games to tell a story of, it's clearly going to sell well. But even with all that, it doesn't feel like it's a cash grab from Collins at all. It felt like she genuinely had a story to tell, and for that I'm very glad of it, because that shows through in the story that's being told. It feels like Collins had a story to tell, and so she went and told a story, not Collins needed money and so she went and wrote a book that she knew everybody would buy. A lot of people think that was the case with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I didn't see that with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I can definitely understand why people would not like that story, but I appreciate it, and I definitely don't see it as a cash grab from Collins, and the same goes for Sunrise on the Reaping. Overall, I enjoyed the book. It's not the best book in the series, I don't think, and although stronger than Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it is not nearly as strong as the original trilogy. Still a worthwhile addition in my mind, and I'm glad that Collins finally wrote this book, especially since it is one that has had a huge amount of desire from the fan base since the original trilogy. This is the most sought after story from the Hunger Games. I think the next one would be Phoenix Hunger Games, a storytelling Phoenix Hunger Games. Yeah, so I'm glad it exists. I'm glad that Collins wrote and released it. I think that it's a good novel. I don't think it's as good as the original trilogy or as impactful, but there's definitely some interesting things going on with it. There's some good storytelling going on with it, and so for all of that stuff, I'm glad that it exists, and I'm happy to have read it. Anyways, that is my review for Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Thank you guys for watching An Erudite Adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and have our social medias linked in the description down below. We will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.